In this minute mythology, I've decided to look at a race in D&D instead of a particular monster. In Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, the Firbolg are described as a reclusive race of giantkin who typically avoided their fellow giants, as well as other humanoid races. They're often seen as the most intelligent and powerful of the giantkin due in part to their affinity for magic. They resemble humans with slightly more bulbous facial features, thicker skin, and deep voices that spoke slowly and soothingly in conversation. Oh, and they also averaged around 8 to 10 feet tall, so that's a bit of a difference there as well. The Firbolg race in D&D are as strong as they are wise, and have much longer lifespans than the average human, living an average of 250 to 500 years. They have a base speed of 30 feet, and can use a racial trait called Hidden Step, in which as a bonus action they can turn invisible. They can cast Detect Magic and Disguise Self innately, which they use primarily to blend in with the other humanoid races. They could also communicate with beasts and plants who would understand their words and intent, though the Firbolgs themselves could not understand the beast or the plant's languages in turn. However, they would get advantage on any charisma checks having to do with influencing these creatures' actions, as beasts and plants were more likely to trust them. As a DM, I would more than likely use a Firbolg as an NPC friendly to the party, mainly because there exists only one Firbolg stat block to my knowledge, an NPC included in Critical Role's Call of the Netherdeep, which is not set in the Forgotten Realms. I would have most Firbolg NPCs in my narratives be connected to nature, such as being part of a druid circle, due to their inherent connection to beasts and plants, and their mostly docile nature. I would have them wary of adventurers, yet still eager to help as long as their visitors are not crazed murder hobos. In Irish mythology, the Firbolg are seen as the fourth group of beings to settle in Ireland after the people of Cessair, Partholon, and Nebid were wiped out by the Fomorians, who were then banished to the depths of the sea. The final of these three people, the Nemed, were said to have been wiped out except for 30 people who renamed themselves the Muintir Nemid, or the clansmen of Nebid. These people decided to spread out across the world, abandoning the war-torn Ireland. Some of these 30 people traveled north and supposedly came to Greece, where they were almost immediately enslaved and made to carry around bags of clay and stone, which led them to renaming themselves and their descendants the Firbolg, or the Men of Bags. The Firbolg eventually returned to Ireland and settled, dividing the land into 5 provinces: North Munster, South Munster, Connacht, Ulster, and Leinster, each ruled by one of their 5 chieftains. Over time, they developed a high kingship, whose seat was at Tara, which in real life is associated heavily with religious and royal power. The Firbolg and their final high king, Eochich Mac Eirch, would rule Ireland for 37 years before the arrival of the Irish deities known as the Tuath Danann. Their king, Nuada, requested half of the island from the Firbolg, as it's apparently their right as the destroyers of the Fomorians, and the king of the Firbolg refused. The two groups then met at the Pass of Balgatan and engaged in a battle which lasted 4 days. In this battle, the champion of the Firbolg, a man named Sreng, challenges Nuada to single combat and manages to cut off the deity's hand. Meanwhile, the Morrigan, a deity later associated with death, slays the Firbolg king, and the Tuath Danann win the battle. In some versions of the myth, the Firbolg then flee Ireland, while in others they're given a quarter of the island to rule by the Tuath Danann. After this, they kind of fade out of myth, but in the Historia Bretonum, the Nemids are mentioned alongside the Partholon and the Gaels, and there is mention also of a people led by a chief named Bolk or Bolg, who fled the main island to settle in an island called Eubonia, which many scholars now believe is what modern people call the Isle of Man. In comparing the 5th edition race to the myth, we find that very little here is similar. However, the initial concepts for the Firbolg in D&D were very different. Originally, they were more traditional giants, and were based on Viking and ancient Celtic warriors, albeit with a strong connection to illusion magic. Over time, the Firbolg were associated with nature and the Fae, becoming warriors of the Wild Hunt, which were commanded by a trio of goddesses associated with fate, neutrality, and death, similar to the triple goddesses of Irish myth called the Morrigan. They were eventually transitioned into a more docile, nature-focused creature, similar to the ending of the Firbolg myth, in which they settle parts of Ireland and live in relative peace with the Tuath Danann as guardians of ancient Celtic forests. If you enjoyed that video, please leave a like and comment below, and consider subscribing to the channel. You can also join the Patreon for $1 a month, link in the description below, to access videos days before they're posted here, as well as other exclusive stuff like short stories, videos, and more. For all of my other content, you can find me on Twitch at Moglaroo, YouTube and TikTok at Moglaroo Streams, or my website, mwjgilmore.com.